So look up Sarasota, Florida, and you can see how far away we might be from wherever you are. Now, we are so excited to be hanging out with you today, but in case you've never heard of Mote Marine Laboratory, we're a world-famous scientific institution with lots of famous ocean scientists that study lots of different types of ocean animals. And one of the ocean animals that we study here are sharks. So as you can see from our logo, we have a shark on our logo. My studio's full of sharks. We're actually pretty famous for our shark research. In fact, we have been studying sharks since 1955 with our founding director, Dr. Eugenie Clark. Now, she was an amazing shark scientist back in the 50s, but we still have some amazing shark scientists here today at Mote. And that is exactly what we're going to be learning about today. So I saw in the chat box that we have so many shark fans out there, and that is so exciting because all of you shark fans out there are going to see a live shark feeding and training session today. So here at Mote Marine Laboratory, we have lots of shark biologists, and we have a lot of sharks that live with us too. So we need to make sure that all of the sharks who live with us here at our aquarium and at our marine laboratory, they get well fed and they get taken care of. And as a result, we're going to share all that with you. So get ready because we are going to learn all about how to feed and train sharks. How cool is that? Now, today's program, we're actually going to be going underwater and using our live shark cam. Now, what you're looking at right now, though, is an aerial view of our shark habitat. Now, this is the largest habitat we have here in our aquarium. It's a 135,000-gallon shark habitat, where not only do we have species of sharks here, but we have lots of other species of fish that are found in the Gulf of Mexico. But you might be wondering, how do we take care of these animals? And what sharks live in this habitat? Well, let's dive in and let's get a closer look. Now, as I mentioned, Mote Marine Laboratory isn't just a marine science center. We're also a public aquarium. Now, this is an aerial view of our campus, and it's actually a really nice relationship because all of our scientists get to study the animals who live in our aquarium rather than having to go out and find them in the ocean, which can be really hard. But then it's also really great because the general public, all of the guests who get to visit our aquarium, get to see science in action, just like what you get to see today, thanks to Microsoft. So we're going to see what types of sharks do we have in our shark habitat. Well, we have 3 sharks who live with us right now. The largest shark that you'll see swimming around is our sandbar shark with those super large side fins that make it kind of look like airplane wings. The smallest shark we have is the black nose shark with that signature black freckle right on the front of its face. And then we have 2 nurse sharks that like to hang out at the bottom of the exhibit. They don't move around too much. Now, the neat thing about our sharks, though, is you might be wondering, what does a scientist do to get the attention of a shark? How do we train these animals? How do they know to work with our biologists? Well, here's the really cool part. We are actually going to be able to see what our scientists use to get the attention of the sharks. Now, what is on your screen right now are 3 different targets. Now, targets are a really cool way for our scientists to get the attention of these animals. Now, believe it or not, sharks are actually smart enough to recognize different shapes, colors, and patterns. And as you can see on this map right here, each shark has its own little station in the shark habitat. So they know where to go and what to do. Now, listen up really closely. All right, did you hear that banging pipe? Well, that banging pipe, it's kind of like a dinner bell for a shark. It lets our sharks know to start looking for their targets. Now, the way that our underwater camera is set up, it's looking right at the black nose shark station. So we're primarily going to be hanging out with the black nose sharks today. But notice how we feed these animals. So a lot of people think that we just throw food out into the water. It's this giant bloody feeding frenzy because sharks are these big scary animals, right? No, not at all. In fact, we actually don't do those types of feedings, but instead we target our sharks with a special type of pole called a target pole. Now, the neat thing about working with sharks this way is that it allows us to have a nice, calm, and controlled feeding that allows us to work with sharks one-on-one. So it provides a way for our scientists to make sure that all of these sharks don't get overfed or underfed. But I need your help, all of you soon-to-be shark scientists. Notice the position of the target on the wall. Is it located super high up on the wall? Is it located kind of in the middle? Or is it located at the very bottom? So make a mental note, because this is a big hint. This is a big clue, because get ready, we're actually going to have a live shark quiz question. So pop quiz all about sharks. So get ready. So why do you think we train our sharks using targets in the first place? Do you think it's A, to teach them not to bite people, B, to teach them how to feed out in nature, or C, to check their health? So write it down on your journal at home, or talk to a friend or a family member. Let's see if you can guess. Do you think it's A, B, or C? Why do we train our sharks? Well, let's see if you figured it out. So the correct answer is, hopefully you've had enough time to write it down. The correct answer is C, to check their health. Now, you might be wondering, how does that work? Well, my big hint, my big clue to you was, where is the target located? Well, it's at the very top of this exhibit, which means that as the sharks swim by, they're right at the surface of the water, which allows our shark scientists to give them a little medical checkup. Now, I don't know about you, but it's pretty hard to bring a shark to the veterinarian. So gosh darn it, we just bring the veterinarian to the shark. So as the shark is swimming right by the surface eating their meal, our veterinarians get to see if there's any bumps or scratches or bruises that might have not been there before. Now, you might be wondering, though, what is on the menu for our sharks? Well, how do we train these animals? Well, we got to give them delicious food. And it turns out that we actually feed them the same type of seafood that you eat. So when you go to a restaurant or a grocery store, you're eating restaurant quality seafood. And that is exactly what we feed our sharks. In fact, they eat the same types of seafood that we eat as well. Now, this allows us to actually go through a process called positive reinforcement, which is a super fancy way to say that we never force any of our animals to work with our scientists. However, if they choose to work with our scientists, then they are positively rewarded with some of their favorite foods. Now, 9 times out of 10, they do work with our scientists because, just like myself, they are very food motivated. And it also allows our scientists to put medicine and vitamins inside of their seafood, and that allows us to make sure that our sharks stay nice and healthy. Not only do they have a balanced diet, but it also allows us to make sure they get all their little vitamin boosters as well. Now, you might be wondering, though, how did we learn how to train sharks in the first place? Well, believe it or not, we've actually been training sharks since 1955. How can that be? Well, I mentioned Dr. Eugenie Clark way back in the beginning of today's program. Well, she was such a famous shark scientist that her nickname was actually the Shark Lady. Now, the neat thing about her is that she was a behavioral scientist, which is a super fancy way to say that she studied how smart a shark really is. Because back in the 1950s, a lot of people thought that sharks were just these big, mean, brainless killers. Well, that's not true at all. In fact, a shark is actually about as smart as a rat or a rabbit, which means that they're smart enough to be target trained. And Dr. Eugenie Clark pioneered that field. And she also pioneered the field of women in marine science. Because back in the 1950s, there weren't a lot of female scientists, let alone female marine biologists, let alone shark biologists. So yay, women in science back in the 1950s. But that was a long time ago. Let's talk about some of the shark science that we're doing today at Mote. Well, one of our most famous shark scientists is named Dr. Bob Hueter. Now, he's famous for studying whale sharks. Now, what is a whale shark famous for? Their size, right? Well, they're super tiny. No, they're not super tiny. They're absolutely gigantic. A whale shark is not only the largest type of shark in the world, but it's also the largest type of fish in the entire world, because a shark is a type of fish, believe it or not. Now, the funny thing about a whale shark, though, is that although it's absolutely gigantic, they're pretty mysterious, and we don't know a lot about them. And Dr. Bob Hueter wanted to fix that, so he decided to go out into the field to study whale sharks. Now, once a year, around the end of spring and the beginning of summer, all of these whale sharks group together off the coast of Mexico. Now, the neat thing is these giant whale sharks, even though they're bigger than a school bus, they only eat teeny tiny little plankton, little tiny shrimp, or the eggs of other fish. But once they finish eating, they pretty much vanish, and we don't know where they go. So after they finish eating off the coast of Mexico, Bob Huter wanted to figure out where in the world are they swimming. And in order to do that, he started attaching satellite tags to their back dorsal fin. Now, a satellite tag is a really special piece of technology where it's almost like a little earring on the back of their dorsal fin. And every time their dorsal fin touches the surface of, sends out a little satellite ping. Now, that ping lets our scientists follow these animals as they swim around the world. And it turns out that these whale sharks are globe-traveling animals. They eat off the coast of Mexico, but they end up off the coast of Africa. How wild is that? Now, whale sharks aren't the only shark that our scientists here at Mote use technology to study. In fact, we have another amazing shark scientist named Dr. Nick Whitney. Now, Dr. Nick Whitney is famous for studying great white sharks, one of the greatest sharks out in the ocean. And although great white sharks are one of the most famous types of sharks in the ocean, they're also really mysterious. We don't really know a lot about them. So Dr. Nick Whitney wanted to fix that. So he started using this super fancy piece of technology called an accelerometer. So for all of you shark scientists out there, have you ever used an accelerometer? Maybe in a science class, maybe in a coding class, in a technology class? Have any of you ever used an accelerometer? I wonder. I bet you're shaking your head out there saying, no, I have not used an accelerometer, but I bet you have. If you have ever used a smart device, ever, then yes, you have used an accelerometer. Whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, the accelerometer is the little piece of technology, the little computer inside your phone that lets you know which direction it's turning so it can adjust the screen in portrait or landscape mode. And believe it or not, that's exactly what it does on sharks too. It lets our scientists know how these sharks are swimming, because you can learn a lot about a shark just by how it moves through the ocean. You can learn if it's hunting. You can learn if it's giving birth. You can learn if it's mating. There are lots of ways that you can study sharks just by seeing how they swim. Now, we know a lot about sharks thanks to all of our amazing field biologists. So, for example, our O-Search team, which is an amazing group of scientists that works out in the field, that does tracking and tagging of really large sharks, hammerheads, great whites, tiger sharks. Now, you can actually follow along and you can see what the O-Search team is up to. If you go to osearch.org, every little blip you see on this map right here is a live satellite tracking tag of one of the sharks that we're studying. So you can actually see where these sharks are moving and how these sharks are swimming throughout the oceans. Now, we have some great field biologists, but we also have some amazing scientists who work with us here in our laboratory at Mote. Now, we have a really amazing program called the Marine Biomedical Research Program. Now, this is a really cool group of scientists that study sharks and their cousins, stingrays and skates, to better understand what's going on inside of their body and how we can apply that to human health. Because you might have heard that rumor that sharks don't get cancer. Well, that's not entirely true. They just kind of get their own special shark cancer, but they're really good at fighting off cancer. They're really good at fighting off viruses, and they're really good at fighting off general sickness. So our scientists study these stingrays and skates to see if we can apply their body and their biology and anatomy into human health to make human medicine. Isn't that the coolest thing? Now, we want to make sure that we're protecting sharks for human health, right? But do we want to protect sharks for ocean health as well? Are sharks even important? So what do we, I mean, they're pretty scary looking, right? Do we need to protect them? Well, here's the neat part. Sharks are super important and they're not scary at all. Sharks have a really important job out in the ocean. So let's take a closer look at what makes a shark's role so special. Well, a shark is known as an apex predator, which means that they're at the very top of the food chain. And their job is to keep everything below them in balance. Because if it falls out of balance and the sharks go away, then everything below them in that food chain completely falls apart, all the way from the fish down to the teeny tiny little plankton. So it's really important that we keep our sharks healthy and we make sure that their role in the ecosystem out in those marine habitats stays balanced. Now, how are sharks doing globally, though? So I'm talking to all of my friends globally, which is awesome. If you are tuning in today, that must mean you love sharks. But how are shark populations doing globally? Unfortunately, they're not doing so well. Sharks are in trouble. There's a lot of threats to sharks, whether it's pollution, whether it's trash that just ends up out in the ocean, which is such a bummer, like fishing gear, for example. But one of the biggest threats, speaking of fishing, is unsustainable fishing. Now, one of your big fancy science vocab words for today is bycatch. Now, bycatch is a really fancy way to say that our fishermen are going after one thing, but they accidentally catch another thing. For example, you might have heard of dolphin-safe tuna. Well, those are tuna that doesn't catch dolphins. Well, you might have heard that sometimes sea turtles get caught in shrimp nets. Well, we don't want that to happen either. Well, unfortunately, sharks live all around the world, so they're often bycatch in pretty much every fishing industry. So one of the best ways to help sharks, no matter where you are in the world, is to use the Seafood Watch app. Now, the Seafood Watch app is a free app from the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California, so on the other side of the United States, and it tells you which seafoods you should eat and which seafoods you shouldn't eat. So it is completely free to use, and it's really easy to understand. If the seafood is listed as green, it means you can eat it whenever you want. If it's listed as yellow, it means don't eat it all the time. And if it's listed as red, you don't want to eat it at all. So those are the best ways to make sure that we are keeping the oceans healthy and we're keeping shark populations healthy as well. Now, sharks have a really important job out in the ocean, and I love that we have so many shark lovers out here. You did such a great job answering all of my super hard science questions that now it's time for you to turn it over to me and ask me some questions. I see we only have a few minutes left, which is such a bummer, but I'd love to answer as many questions as possible. Now, while you are typing your questions into the Q&A section of this program, I do want to address one question that I saw earlier at the very beginning, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. I love it. It was such a good one, about why are nurse sharks called nurse sharks? Do nurse sharks actually heal? That is such a great question. I love that. So whoever said that, fantastic. So nurse sharks don't get their name from the fact that they're like a nurse who heals, but they get their name from like you nurse a bottle. You like a baby is like nursing. Well, they get their name because the way they eat sounds a lot like suction. So the way that like a baby slurps on a bottle, that like sound, that almost like kind of kissing suction sound, that's exactly what a nurse shark sounds like when they eat. They have really weird teeth. They don't have these big sharp teeth, but instead they kind of have these round bumpy teeth. And that's because they love to eat shelled animals that live in crevices in coral reefs. But those shelled animals like crabs and lobsters, they don't want to come out of those holes. So the nurse sharks actually suction out those animals out of those coral reef caves. So that's where their name nurse shark comes from, because they're kind of nursing and they're sucking those animals right out of those holes. That was such a great question. Anyway, now we have a great question about how many teeth does a shark have? Boy, that is such a good question. So I know this is a pretty lame answer, but I actually can't give you one answer because it really depends on the type of shark. However, most sharks actually have about 5 rows of teeth in their mouth at any given time. So a shark doesn't really chew the same way we do, but instead they shake their head back and forth, and that kind of rips up their prey. Now, because they shake their head back and forth, they lose teeth all the time. So that's because they have this nice kind of like conveyor belt system. So they'll pop out a tooth and then the next one kind of will spring forward. So they lose hundreds of teeth throughout their life. And they have about 5 rows of teeth in their mouth at any time. Wild to think about. Let's see, what sharks like to live in the northern hemisphere? That's a really great question. So one of the most famous sharks that lives in really cold Arctic water is the Greenland shark. Now, where does the Greenland shark like to live? Around Greenland, of course. They actually live in the Arctic Circle. Now, the neat thing about the Greenland shark is that they not only live in absolute freezing temperatures, but they're really special because out of any animal with a backbone, with that spine running down their back, the neat thing about sharks is that the Greenland shark will actually live to 400 years old. So they're the longest living animal with a spine. However, the neat thing about sharks is that their spine isn't made of bone. It's made out of cartilage. So if you wiggle your ears, if you wiggle your nose, it's made out of cartilage. Sharks have no bones in their body, but their spine is made out of cartilage. Now, I see that we have about 5 minutes left. So we only have about time for one more question, but then we're going to share with you an awesome resource. So don't worry if we didn't get to your question. So what are the biggest and smallest sharks will be the last question we talk about. So the biggest shark in the entire world is the whale shark that we mentioned. So it gets bigger than a school bus, over 45 feet long. But the smallest shark in the world, boy, there's some really tiny ones. So one of the smallest sharks is the lantern shark, which as a full-grown adult only gets about as big as a ruler. However, the tiniest shark in the world is known as the pocket shark, and it's only about as big as your hand as a full-grown adult. This image on your screen is a full-grown adult pocket shark. Absolutely adorable, super tiny. Now, unfortunately, we are out of time, which is such a bummer. But, oh, I do see a comment that says sharks aren't dangerous, and you're absolutely right. There are 500 species of sharks. 80% of them are smaller than 5 feet long. And out of those 500 species of sharks, 99% of shark-human interactions are only within 3 species: the tiger shark, the bull shark, and the great white. So sharks are really important. They're super cool, and you have nothing to worry about. So because you're all shark lovers out there, I want to share with you this really special resource. So we have partnered with a website called Flipgrid. Now, Flipgrid is a really cool website where you can leave us a video voicemail. So in case we didn't get to your question today, I would love for you to join us on Flipgrid to ask your shark question, and we will respond with a free personalized video answer. So it's a great way, in case we didn't get to your question, to stay in touch with all of our scientists here at Mote Marine Lab. So consider us here all the way in Florida, your ocean science pen pals, whenever you have any ocean science questions. Now, we are out of time. However, we learned a lot about sharks today. So your homework, the job I'm assigning you, is to go out and share one new shark fact with a friend or a family member who wasn't with us today, because the more we share about sharks, the more we care about sharks. Us a video voice us here all the way in Florida, your ocean science pen pals, whenever you have any ocean science questions. Now, we are out of time. However, we learned a lot about sharks today. So your homework, the job I'm assigning you, is to go out and share one new shark fact with a friend or a family member who wasn't with us today, because the more we share about sharks, the more we care about sharks. And we want everyone to care about sharks because they're so cool. So once again, my name is Ross. I'm coming to you live from Mote Marine Laboratory. Thank you so much to connecting with all of my friends here at the Microsoft Global Learning Connection Day. This was